Story 1. Craters in Her Face. I've always been an art enthusiast. I guess I inherited that from my grandmother. She had been a painter for many years and tried her best to instill a love of the fine arts in me. I have many fond memories of trips to museums and galleries with her, gazing upon the countless beautiful and thought-provoking pieces. Sculpture and photography were nice, but I always had a special place in my heart for paintings, especially old oil paintings. It's hard to explain. There's a sort of special property to paintings that you can only appreciate with your eyes in person. Photographs do them no justice. The way the light refracts off of the oil and bounces back to your eyes give them a sort of life that no other medium can. Well, as much as I loved oil paintings, I was never much good myself. As a child, my grandmother tried giving me lessons. She'd create a breathtaking scenery, whilst the only thing I managed to make was a colossal mess. Despite my apparent lack of talent in the oil painting department, it did not in the slightest diminish my love for the craft. My grandmother had a room dedicated to the paintings she had created or collected, which she dubbed the gallery. I spent hour upon hour in that room, staring in wonderment. Despite my being a child, my grandmother had no qualms with leaving me alone in a room with tens of thousands of dollars worth of paintings. She knew I had far too much respect for them to damage them, even as a bouncy little girl. She did, however, have one rule that was to be strictly adhered to at all times in the gallery. If any paintings in the gallery are covered, you are not to uncover them, not even to peek. Now, some might think this a strange rule. I certainly did as a girl, but there is reason behind it. All paints are very sensitive, and it's possible the pieces she had covered up could be damaged if exposed to light or various other factors. But regardless of the reasoning, I made sure to follow that rule, or at least I did, until the day my grandmother received her newest piece. I remember arriving at my grandmother's home for a visit and running straight for the gallery. I rounded the corner into the room when I was forced to screech to a halt. There, in the center of the room, was an incredibly large painting, propped up by an easel and covered with a long, dark curtain. I had never seen the piece before, and the sheer size of it astounded me. My curiosity overtook me for a moment, and I found myself slowly reaching out a tiny hand to unveil the mysterious piece. But just as my hand grasped the dark velvet, my grandmother entered the room, wearing a frown. "Evelyn, what are you doing? You know the rule about covered paintings." My hand instantly whipped back to my side, and my head sulked at the realization of my actions. "I'm sorry, Grandma, I forgot. This painting, it's so huge. What is it?" My grandmother's expression softened, and she placed a hand on my shoulder. "This painting was just given to me by a friend. Her ill sister painted it shortly before passing away. She said she couldn't bear to look at it because it made her too sad, so she gave it to me." "May I see it?" I asked. "Perhaps later. It's very sensitive because it's in poor condition. I'm going to try to preserve it, though. After I'm done, I'll let you see it like with all the others," she warmly responded. Although my curiosity was not satisfied, I agreed and resigned myself to looking at all the other pieces in the gallery, content that I would no longer cause any sort of mischief. My grandmother returned to the sitting room. I lay there in the soft plush carpet, gazing at the works of art until my focus drifted. Despite how bad I knew it was to disobey my grandmother, My curiosity continued to burn hot in my chest. I had already stared at each and every piece in the gallery to detail, and had grown restless. I had to see what was beneath the curtain. Holding my breath, and tiptoed over to the massive easel and grasped the soft fabric in my hand. I'd just peek for a moment. It wouldn't hurt, just long enough to quench this burning need to know. I released the breath I was holding and quickly pulled the curtain aside. Immediately, I felt myself release a gasp. I had seen countless paintings of all genres and matters, but none so utterly disturbing as what lay before me. The painting depicted what appeared to be a pale young woman. Her skin was a sickly yellow and appeared clammy and unwell. She wore a tattered ivory dress, and her long black hair flowed behind her, seemingly following wind sources from no particular direction. She sat in anguish with her hands held up to the side of her face, digging her long black nails into the flesh. As uncomfortable as the piece was as a whole, what really unnerved me was her eyes and mouth. Black, gaping holes sunk into her head where they should have been, and a thick, rust-colored fluid seemed to leak from them. Immediately I panicked and threw the curtain back over the horrid painting. I wanted to run screaming and crying straight to my grandmother, but I restrained myself. I knew that if I did that, she'd know I disobeyed her by looking under the curtain. So instead I gave myself a moment to regain my breath and composure before calmly joining my grandmother in the sitting room. I never went into the gallery by myself again. That is until my grandmother passed away, naming me the sole recipient of her painting collection. The reading of the will was an uncomfortable enough experience on its own, but it was made worse by the fact that my jealous cousins were also present. My grandmother's estate, belongings, and all of her life earnings were to be split evenly amongst the family. I, however, was chosen to receive the paintings alone. I knew this was because my grandmother knew of my great love for the art, and that I would be the only one not to sell all of them for the money. However, my cousins simply saw it as me inheriting nearly $80,000 in all paintings, and not sharing a dime of it. Oh, you can believe they tried to contest the will, but it was ironclad, and, despite their protests, I soon enough found myself transporting the pieces into my own home. My boyfriend Edward and I had purchased a lovely Victorian-style home 2 years prior, and I, following in my grandmother's footsteps, had dedicated the long hallway and large room at the end of the 3rd floor to hosting my own collection of paintings. My grandmother had a great deal more paintings than I, but Edward and I managed to shuffle things around until everything had a cozy new home. Well, everything except for the one, nearly 6-foot-tall canvas, wrapped methodically in several layers of brown paper and twine. Instantly a knot formed in my stomach. I knew exactly which piece it was. The image of the tormented young woman with bloody caverns in her face flooded my mind, and I felt myself growing pale. Edward, however, did not share the same unfortunate memory, and excitedly began unwrapping the piece. I rushed forward to stop him, exclaiming how I wanted him to keep it wrapped, as it was a horrifically gruesome piece. However, by the time I reached him, he had already revealed the piece's glossy surface. I prepared myself for the horrible sight, but, to my shock, it was different. The sickly girl in the white dress still stood, hair flowing in the known-present wind, and hands digging into her cheeks. But the bloody craters were gone. Instead, she now appeared to be a pretty little thing. She had soft pink cheeks, sparkling green eyes, and her lips parted daintily into a dreamy smile. I recognized the style immediately. This was my grandmother's work. She had done an exceptional job covering over the old, horrific facade, however. If I inspected the piece closely, I could still see traces of the gruesome sight hiding right below the surface. My grandmother had clearly worked painstakingly on the piece. To anyone who hadn't seen the original, it actually did appear quite pleasant. I, however, hated it to my core. Edward, on the other hand, was instantly in love. The next few days consisted of us arguing over where the piece would be hung. We were out of room in the gallery, and he insisted upon hanging it on the large blank wall on the far side of our bedroom. I, of course, wanted nothing to do with the piece. Thus the fighting began. Finally, we came to an agreement. I would let him hang the piece in our room for the time being, but I would begin looking for the family of the woman who originally painted the piece. Obviously, they wouldn't want to look at it in its former state, as it forever captured the state of sickness in their beloved family member. But nah, it was beautiful. It would memorialize her as she was before the sickness began changing her. Certainly they would want it back now. Edward was hesitant, but agreed that returning it when I found the family would be the right thing to do. So it was that I prepared myself for a few weeks' stops of having to gaze at the uncomfortable piece. The piece went up, and, despite my reservations, it actually wasn't as bad as I was expecting. Without the bloody chasms, the threatening aura of the piece was gone, and I will admit that seeing my grandmother's painting style made me a little happy, and while it had taken a few days, I finally tracked down a phone number for the family. The daughter of the woman who had given the painting to my grandmother answered, and seemed excited when I told her of the relic from her aunt. She said she wanted the piece, but she needed some time to find a place for it. Excitedly, we both agreed to hand over the piece the following week. My excitement, however, quickly faded when I learned that Edward was going to be leaving town for the remainder of our time in possession of the piece. Due to business, displaying the piece was one thing, but being home alone with it was an entirely different situation. Despite my grandmother's beautiful work, being alone in the same room with the piece always left me with an uncomfortable knot in my stomach. So after kissing Edward goodbye and locking the door, I immediately ran to the linen closet, where I promptly grabbed a sheet to throw over the creepy painting. I stormed into my bedroom, armed with the linen and a tack, and came to a halt in front of the piece. It was very vague, and I needed to squint my eyes and lean in to notice it, but it appeared as though my grandmother's paint had begun to crack and peel a bit, revealing glimpses of the rusty brown color hiding right below. That was impossible, though the piece was nowhere near old enough for that to occur. All paint is famous for staying wet for a very long time. There are even some paintings from the Middle Ages that are still moist on the inside. There was no way the paint here should be peeling. Just the sight of that gross, rusty paint made me feel ill. I immediately threw the sheet over it and breathed a sigh of relief when I was no longer confronted with the eerie sight. I couldn't give the painting back soon enough. It was about this time that strange things began happening. Nothing huge and panic-worthy, just little things. Doors I could swear I had left open would be inexplicably closed. Every so often I'd feel a soft gust of air as if someone had just walked by, and an occasional creak or groan which weren't all too uncommon in a home as old as mine. Things continued on like this for the first few days Edward was gone. It was Wednesday. Edward would be back on Sunday, and we'd return the piece on Monday. As uncomfortable as I was, my goal was in sight, and I knew I'd make it. A few more days passed, and things were going relatively well, until I decided to look at the piece again. I had been on the phone with the shipping company earlier, trying to decide the best way to wrap and transport the piece. I figured that the cracking and peeling of the piece must have been due to improper preparation and handling, and wanted to avoid further damage. Hesitantly, I lifted the sheet for a quick assessment. I immediately dropped the sheet once more and backed away in a moment of panic. The paint had continued to deteriorate, and now even more of the seeping rust was breaking through the girl's once lovely face, now leaving her with a grotesque, cracked open face. It was at this point that I decided I needed to speak with the family once more. I dialed the number and, to my surprise, found that the woman who had gifted my grandmother with the piece all those years ago was still alive and had answered the phone. Apprehensively, I told her about the piece, and she immediately invited me over to talk about it over tea. Jumping at the opportunity to not be home alone with the piece, I grabbed my purse and immediately headed over. Upon arriving at the address, I was greeted at the door by a smiling old woman. She graciously welcomed me into the home, and in minutes we were settled in the front room with daintily painted teacups in our hands. She released a long sigh before speaking. That painting should have been destroyed a long time ago. She breathed sadly. You've seen it. It's terrible and frightening. It's the result of a very sick mind. She shifted her gaze down to her teacup before continuing. My sister had brain cancer. In its final stages, she became very ill mentally. When there was nothing more the doctors could do for her, they sent her home and told us to make her comfortable. She always loved painting, so we bought her the biggest canvas we could and hoped to make her last moments happy ones. But as you can see, they weren't. Her mind was plagued by demons. She began withdrawing more and more into the madness of her own world, and it showed on the canvas. I actually walked in on her slashing her arms with a palette knife and mixing her blood right into the paint. The image of the gross, rusty color oozing from the craters in the girl's face flashed across my mind, and I had to set my cup down for fear of dropping it. I was going to get rid of it. The old woman continued, burn it after my sister passed away, but your grandmother, ever the art enthusiast, insisted on keeping it instead. I don't know why. It's a horribly dreadful piece, and now, what's worse, my daughter wants it back in our home. Please, I beg of you, burn it. Burn it right to ashes. Destroy that accursed thing. Right at that moment, the old woman's daughter walked into the room. Mother, what is wrong with you? We have almost nothing to remember Aunt Marnie by, and when something she made with her own hands finally resurfaces in our life, you say to burn it. It's a bad painting, Sarah. It's dark, and it's angry, and it holds all the ugliness of the disease that took your aunt from us. No, it's not. Evelyn here said that her grandmother restored it. It's beautiful now, and I want to display it in our home to honor Aunt Marnie. You're my mother, and I love you. But this is my home, and I want the painting. That's final. By this point, the atmosphere in the home had gotten quite awkward, so I readily thanked them for the tea and made my way back home, my newfound knowledge about the piece making me even less eager to keep it in my bedroom. Without realizing it, I had spent far more time visiting the old woman than I had expected. That, paired with the sizable drive back home, I found night to have already fallen by the time I finally arrived on my front porch. The house was empty and quiet, and confirmed my decision to sleep in the guest room that night. Edward would be back the next day. Silly as I felt, just one night in the guest room wouldn't kill me. I snuggled down with a good book and read until I felt my eyes growing heavy. It had been a while since I had felt this at ease. I was quite happy to have made the decision to sleep away from the dreadful painting. Within moments, I found myself drifting off to a peaceful sleep. However, this did not last. What I assumed to be several hours later, I awoke to the sound of a slamming door. I jolted awake, my heart racing. I was home alone and feared for a burglar. I immediately began scoping the room for something I could use as a weapon. Thinking quickly, I pulled down the pole that was holding up the curtain and wielded it like a staff. Slowly, I crept through the doorway, keeping as silent as possible. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heart rapidly beating in my ears. Strangely, nothing in the house was amiss. I stood in the hallway pondering a moment before deciding which direction to move in. My first instinct was to reach for the light switch. What if there was an intruder? Hitting the light would immediately give away my position, so I decided to navigate in the dark. I knew my own home better than a thief would, so if I moved quietly, I'd have the element of surprise on my side. Just then I had to muffle a scream as the door to my bedroom at the end of the hall slammed shut. Then the sound of weeping filled the home. It was sad and distant, but it was definitely coming from my room. Acting on instinct instead of logic, I hit the light switch in the hall and went to investigate. Slowly and as quietly as I could, I cracked open the door. The light from the hallway spilled into the dark room, and immediately the weeping stopped. I held my breath for a moment, not sure of what would happen next. That's when my eyes fell upon the painting. The sheet lay crumpled beneath it. I know it was covered the last time I had seen it, yet there it was, strewn across the floor. Shaking, I pushed the door open further, allowing more light to spill into the room. The oil painting on the far end of the room illuminated, hungrily refracting the beam of light that now shone across it. The last flecks of flesh-colored paint my grandmother had painstakingly applied to the top coat had crumbled away, once more revealing the horrifying visage I remember from my childhood. I froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the same disgust that had captured me all those years ago the first time I laid eyes on the piece. That sickly yellow skin, those long black nails, the inexplicable whine that defied natural law. It all looked so terrifyingly real in the faint light. Those deep oozing craters. Wait, oozing? Oh my God, there's no way. The craters in her face were actually oozing that horrible rusty material. It was impossible, but those deep, dark crevices were literally dripping with the stuff. I could see it seep out of the canvas and hear the splatters on the hardwood floors below. I knew I should run, but my feet seemed glued to their place. I tried to calm my heavy, raspy breaths. However, I soon realized that they weren't mine. I held my breath for a moment, and the scratchy exhales continued. I focused my gaze on the abomination on the wall and released a silent scream. The painting was moving. The woman's bony, The shape and chest was jaggedly rising and falling in sync with the heavy breathing that now filled the room. My eyes widened in terror. As my worst fear came to light, the painting slowly began to lurch. The shape of a crater-filled head began to push through the canvas as if it were merely a sheet of spandex. As the wretched figure began to force its way through, I finally regained my senses. I slammed the door shut and began running down the hall. I had only made it a few feet before I heard an enormous thud. The canvas had fallen off the wall, and at that precise moment, the wailing resumed, this time so loud I physically had to cover my ears. Right as I rounded the corner, I shrieked in fear as I was immersed in total blackness. I tried desperately to orient myself, but my night vision had only just started to develop. In a panic, I continued forward with my hands outstretched, hoping to find the banister that led downstairs. A jolt of terror ran up my spine when I heard the creak of a door opening, followed by the sound of something heavy thumping. Then, dragging down the hall, the weeping had turned into wild shrieks, and were so loud they were disorienting. I nearly fell down the stairs when my hands finally grasped the banister. As quickly as I could, I began racing down the stairs. The thumping and dragging sounded closer now. It was moving far faster than I thought. When I got to the bottom of the staircase, I felt for the side table on the right and threw it to the ground, hoping to slow it down. Something was off now, though. The shrieking had stopped. It was silent. No thumping, no dragging, just silent. For some reason this scared me even more, so I ran as quickly as I could, despite the dark, straight for the front door. Right as I was mere feet from grasping the handle, I felt my feet give out from underneath me. Something bony and cold had wrapped itself around my ankle. I fought wildly to break free as the sound of heavy breathing filled the room loudly again. I saw the form of something large and dark approaching me, and I swung wildly with my hands. I felt them dig into something cold and moist. In disgust, I used all my might to push it back and break through the front door, slamming it shut behind me. I didn't stop running until the sun had begun to rise. When I finally stopped, I collapsed on the ground, panting heavily. I raised my hand to wipe my brow, but stopped. I had been so focused on fleeing up until now that I hadn't taken a moment to look at my hand. It was covered in a dark, rusty material and tangled in several strands of long, black hair. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. When Edward returned, he found the home had been targeted by burglars. The place was trashed, but it was rather odd. Only one thing in the entire home had been stolen. He noticed that the large, lovely painted my grandmother had restored was nowhere to be found. The police came by and told me I was lucky to have escaped. I just nodded and kept quiet. After all, a burglary was the only logical explanation, right? This was a fairly textbook case, you see. A large Victorian home full of valuable paintings makes a tempting target for thieves. There was, however, one detail about the case that seemed to have everyone baffled. All throughout the home, there were trails of a dark, rusty fluid. Lab reports later confirmed it to be a strange combination of paint and old, rotten blood. I'm not much a fan of paintings anymore. Edward and I sold the gallery and are using the money to plan our wedding and are currently looking for a new home. I told him that I have trouble sleeping here because I have nightmares about the break-in, but the truth is we never did find the painting, and some nights I'll lay in bed moments away from drifting off, and I'll swear I hear the sound of distant, raspy breaths. Story 2. Daddy's Girl. After Mama got sick, Daddy didn't act the same. He'd go off into their room and not come out for days. I was just 13 at that time, but Daddy said I was big and needed to take care of things. I liked feeling responsible. Back then, it was just me, Sarah Beth, and baby Uni. And Uni wasn't much more than 9 months old. She still wanted the teat. But with Mama come sick and all since Uni was born, she had to suckle on one of the mama pigs we had left. We called her Kicker, 'cause she would always try to kick baby Uni away when she would try to drink. But after a while Kicker got used to it and would show off her pink belly as soon as she saw Uni come round. Maybe even thought that Uni was her own piglet, since Kicker's litter was so small that year. Once, Sarah Beth tried to drink some of Kicker's milk too. She said it was sour, so I never had none of it. We lived on a modest hog farm out in the middle of nowhere with not much more than a winter barn for the pigs and a rickety house turned all gray from the sun. The ground wasn't good for plowing. What Daddy had tried up until all the grass died out and the trees started to shrivel. We never saw nobody neither, but Daddy told us there used to be a lot of people living out that ways before we were born. Me and Sarah Beth would run around the farm namming all the pigs and smacking them into something fierce. They would howl and squeal. Daddy didn't like that though. He took out his gun once. When we started having to take care of baby Uni, we would bring her into the pig pen too. She was too little to talk, but we would ask her to say their names. That one's named Big Ed Uni. We said, "Can you say Big Ed?" We said. Sarah Beth always tried to name one America, but I always told her that you can't rightly name a big something like that unless you're just a skin for someone to get confused. Then Sarah Beth would oink like a shore hog, and we would fall in the mud and laugh our cheeks red. She looked just like Mama when she smiled, right down to the gums. Most of the time life on the farm was pretty easy, I'd say. Every morning at the crack of dawn me and Sarah Beth would go down and put some more wood on the stove so that the house would stay nice and warm. That's the way Mama liked it, Daddy would say. We'd eat something small and watch the fire crackle in the potbelly, the hungry tongues lapping across the grain like a horse on a salt block. Then we would go get baby Uni and take her down to get her milk. She would always squint and grin up to her nose at the sun. Then we walk out. She would clap her hand on her belly and laugh when we played with her special arm. It was smaller than the other one and didn't work to right neither, even though Daddy had said that baby Uni didn't have to drink milk no more. We would still take her to Kicker. It was fun to get her used to all the pigs since there weren't much else to do, but Daddy insisted that we started giving her solid food. So we'd soften up some bread and water and pop it into Junie's mouth. I thought she wouldn't be too happy with it, but she always ate her plate empty. When we got done eating, we'd go out and water all the pigs from some old pump Daddy said his daddy had dug down. You'd have to wait for the mud clear from it before you put your bucket under, or else you'd have to make more trips to get good drinking water. That's what I hated, having to walk back and forth between to the pump and the pig pen was always my least favorite part. After a while, the pump stopped giving so much water, though, and I didn't have to walk so much. That was nice, but a couple of the pigs died Sarah Beth cried for a whole day. Most of our chores were keeping care of the pigs, so once that was done, me and Sarah Beth could do whatever we wanted until dinner. I always liked playing inside and was good at convincing Sarah Beth to play what I wanted. Go hide and I'll count, I'd say, and she would swing her little legs as fast as she could get away. One day I thought I heard her go out the front door, and I had told her that was against the rules. Sarah Beth, I yelled, you better not be cheating. I heard a girl scream, and I had thought that maybe she had tripped or something. So I ran out to go find her. I searched forever looking for her, in the barn and in all the pens, even though Daddy had told me not to. I started checking around the woods. Just as I thought about giving up, I found another one of the pigs outside its pen. Something had cut into good. It didn't have a head, and all its insides were on the outside and a ring of innards around the corpse like a Christmas wreath around a ham. I went back in the house to tell Daddy, like he said I should. When I walked in, I saw Daddy carrying Sarah Beth out of Mama's room. She was bawling and crying, her little eyes out, and Daddy gave her several whoops on the face with a tattered boot for going in there. He put her in the basement for a little while to learn her a lesson. I told Daddy about the pig when he got done locking the door. Nother one of the pigs got out, I told him. It did. Yeah, something really got into it. Daddy pulled its insides all around. It will be gone in the morning, honey, but thanks for telling me. That's why you're my big girl. I loved Daddy back then. How long is Sarah Beth gonna be down there this time? Long time. She never learned like you did, baby girl. She just misses Mama, I think. We all miss Mama. Is she feeling any better? Daddy? You know not to ask about Mama. Baby girl. There was another shriek coming from outside. Daddy sighed and unlocked the basement. How about you get uni? I didn't like the basement. I learned Daddy's lessons early, so I wouldn't have to go down there. It's dark down there, Daddy. Can't I stay up here with you? I remember smelling something right foul come off his chest and from the cracked door to his room. Go get your sister, he snapped. So I did, and me, Sarah Beth, and baby Uni stayed in basement until Daddy said it was all right to come on back out. While we were down there, I could hear Sarah Beth still sniffling and whining. Why you gotta do stuff like that, Sarah Beth? Stuff that Daddy tells you not to. I saw Mama. She looked like a scarecrow. I really wanted to ask. Not for me, but for Uni. I was real worried that she would never get to know her mother, but Daddy said to never ask about Mama, so that's what I did. That's why Daddy licks you. He says you never learn your lessons. I could hear wipe her nose on her sundress. Maybe. We heard more screaming from upstairs, heard something bust on the floor, heard Daddy curse. Lasted for a couple of hours. There was always a lot of commotion when we went into the basement, and baby Uni started crying up a storm. I had to tell Sarah Beth not to hold the baby's mouth shut 'cause she couldn't breathe. We didn't like when Uni started crying 'cause it took her a long time to stop. She's probably hungry, I said. I popped my finger in our baby's mouth, and she pecked on it, trying for some milk. She thinks it's kicker. I tried to tell Sarah Beth, but she wasn't paying attention. She walked along the wall, running her fingers against the shelves of mason jars. You couldn't tell 'cause of how dark it was, but Daddy kept a lot of preserves down there. fruit like canned pears and peaches and apples, some tomatoes and onions too. There were also stacks of tubs filled with beans and rice lining the walls. But mice had done chewed into a couple of those. They even got into Doogie's old box of toes, and I always wondered what they needed with a bunch of dusty tractors and things. Doogie didn't need them anymore, I guess. Daddy said he wouldn't be coming back. The preserves were safe, though, and sometimes I'd go into the basement, looking at all their different colors and thinking about what they tasted like. I liked knowing most of the jars were still full. When Daddy let us out of the basement, and it was already almost daytime, and he said he could take care of our chores that day. When he tucked me into bed, he had already bandaged a couple wounds on his arms and hands. He had a black eye. They hurt. Daddy? Nah, don't worry about that, baby. Did Sarah Beth remember to latch the pen today? I nodded. Good, you got to keep an eye on her. She's not careful like you are. Daddy didn't tuck in Sarah Beth that night. I'm not sure she would have wanted him to neither. She always got really cold when Daddy beat her, and as soon as he left the room, she was up, looking out the window. Daddy will whoop you again if he sees you up. She didn't say anything for a while, just standing with the morning sun on her face looking real intent at something. I just had to know, 'cause I saw what got to that pig last. It looked just like Mama. Don't tell lies. Sarah Beth, I know what I seen. Recently, she was always making up those kinds of stories. I went to sleep without saying another word. The next morning I noticed that Eunie didn't look too good. She turned real pale and didn't want to eat. I tried to ask Daddy what we should do, but he was in his room taking care of Mama and said that he was busy. All the chores were already done, and Sarah Beth was still sore from the day before. She didn't want to play, so me and baby Eunie went for a walk, 'cause I thought that it might make her feel a little better to get some fresh air and see the pigs. We were walking to the pen when Eunie started crying, and she threw up. It's all right, Junebug, I said, and I'd pat that poor angel on the back. She was as gray as a ghost, but we kept walking. Around the corner of the pen we could see into Daddy's room. He left the window open that day probably so Mama could get some fresh air too. It was cool and a nice summer day for that kind of thing. Me and Eunie could see Daddy doing something inside, and he'd pop in front of the window now and again. I'd point at him with Eunie's special hand and say, "There's Daddy, Eunie. What's he doing, Eunie?" I'd tell her how hard of a worker Daddy was, and how him and Mama used to dance in the kitchen before she got sick. I told her how Mama used to make pie, how she would mush up the butter and flour in a bowl, how she would can her own fillings, how she always let me and Sarah Beth lick the spoon when she got done smoothing out the fruit. I told her how Daddy said not to get into any of the cans, so Mama would have something to bake with when she got better. Eunie didn't seem like she cared all that much, though. She just closed her little blue eyes and went right to a nap. There wasn't much to do with the pigs since Eunie was asleep, so I went and got a blanket from the house and put it into one of the troughs to make a little crib. I laid her down, and she looked just like baby Jesus from the picture books. A couple of the pigs came by and snorted at her real gentle like, and I was sure she'd feel straight as a maypole once she got a little rest. Eunie was such a sweet little pea, but Daddy didn't seem to take to her that much. I always wondered why. She didn't never do anything wrong, not like Sir Beth did. Once I heard Daddy said that it was Junie's fault for making Mama sick. He said that Junie was a bad baby, but I didn't believe that. I always thought that Mama would be real proud of all of us once she got better. Even Sarah Beth. I was kicking rocks into the woods, thinking about all that stuff. Seemed like the forest got closer and closer each year. All those yellow trees bowing down towards the house. Sometimes in the spring they would have leaves the size of your hand, and Daddy used to put them in between the pages of a book and scratch 'em up with a crayon. When he got done doing that with a bunch of 'em, he'd put 'em all up on the wall. Trees used to look like that. He'd say used to be full of leaves and flowers. I didn't know what flowers looked like except what Daddy would draw up for me. He said the world wasn't a place for beautiful things anymore. Said that's why me and Sarah Beth couldn't play in the woods. That where all the flowers went. Daddy, the woods. I'd ask and he'd always say something like that. Baby girl. Just then I heard Daddy yellin' up something awful, and wouldn't you believe it, Sarah Beth done tried to get into Mama's room again. I walked in the living room just in time to see him lick her across the jaw. Daddy had her by the hair and opened up the Bible that he always kept on the coffee table, its pages falling apart like flakes of yellow paint. He pushed her face right down in the pages like you do with a dog when it has an accident in the house. God don't like little girls who don't obey. Sarah Beth sends 'em right to hell. He hit her face on the good book so rough that the glass underneath cracked and splintered all over the tight-knit rug below. You want to go to hell. Sarah Beth was trying not to step in any of the glass. No, Daddy. Her head was already bleeding. No, they used to kill girls with big old rocks when they were bad. Do you want that? No, Daddy. He dragged her to the basement and threw her down the steps. I could hear her gasping for wind when she hit the bottom, slamming the deadbolt shut. He spun around to me with a fire in his eyes. What do I always say about Mama's room? I could see a tooth on top of the broken bits of the table. To not go in it. He nodded and stormed back to Mama's and him's room. Sarah Beth had what was comin' to her, but this time I didn't feel so good about how Daddy handled things. I sat down on floor, careful not to cut myself. Careful not to make a bigger mess. Careful not to make a sound. People spittin' and hollerin' always turned me pretty sour, so I just stayed right there thinking about things. The world just feels real small in those moments, those times when nothing's making a peep. I swear, that house got so quiet sometimes you could hear the mice whispering in the walls, and you'd wonder what they're talking about. I don't rightly think mice can talk, though I wanted my Mama back. Things stayed nice and quiet like that all the way until sundown. Through the window, I could see the golden ribbons of twilight making their way through the trees right to the house. They'd cast these long fingers that clawed along the floor beams as they got closer to disappearing, and for the first time in my life I kinda wish they'd take me away from the farm. I wasn't too certain that there was anything out there past the forest, though Daddy said there used to be. I stuck out my toes, catching the last bits of sun on their tips. Sarah Beth had been in the basement for a while, figured she would be there all night if Daddy wound up falling asleep, so I tiptoed over the glass and to the basement door where I could hear Sarah Beth tapping her toes against the wood. Screwing open the deadbolt, I peeked my head in, and the door stopped on its hinges when it bumped into Sarah Beth, who was sitting on the steps. "Sarah Beth, yeah, better come out. Think Daddy's done gone to sleep now." I sat down beside her. Her cheeks were flushed from crying, and her bleeding mouth had gone and ruined her dress. "Why do you gotta do that? Do what Teddy tells you not to." I had to know for sure. I saw Mama, Rosie. She put a hand on my cheek. "Out in the woods." I got plumb mad at that. "Stop with that." "I'm not lying. Mama ain't in her room like Daddy says she is." "Liars go to hell." "Sarah Beth, I can show you." Sarah Beth shot up like a toad on a hot plate, dragging me along with her. Pieces of her hair were still all matted to her head. I didn't want to follow. I knew I shouldn't. Daddy had said not to look, and I knew that. I knew not to look, but Sarah Beth took me outside, round the corner, and to the open window. We crouched under the windowsill. She pointed up and over, looking like she was about to cry again. I shouldn't have, but I did. I saw in the room. I saw Daddy sleeping in bed, sleeping with a pig and one of Mama's old dresses. I didn't want to see any more, but I couldn't stop staring till Sarah Beth yanked me down back under the window. "Get down. You were only supposed to peek." She started drumming, her toes real nervous. I was speechless and starting to shake. I could smell copper in my nose, and my head got woozy, especially after we heard the screaming coming from the woods again. Sarah Beth jumped at the sound. I didn't. I felt like my body was full of dust, like I was about to float away. The pigs started squealing. She grabbed me at the shoulders. "Where's Eunie?" I couldn't remember. "Hey, where is baby June?" Another scream ripped through the air. "Tig pen," was all I could say, and Sarah Beth started running with me by the hand again. Getting closer to the pen, we could see that some of the hogs were out, and the ones that weren't were trying to climb their way over the fence. Even the nice ones that I had named, ran away from me when we got close, looking at me like I was a jackal. I tried to pull my arm out of Sarah Beth's grip so I could try to corral the spooked pigs, but she held me even tighter. She said we needed to worry about June first. I was worried about June. I was worried about the pigs, too, and Sarah Beth and all. I was worried about everyone and everything at that point. I was the responsible one. Whatever had gotten into the pen had managed to open the latch, but by the time we got there, it was gone. Some of the pigs were still crawling over each other to get out, though. I went straight to the trough where I had laid our sister. The blanket was still there just as I left it, but June was gone. I stared in shock and disbelief, and I could see Sarah Beth darting her head back and forth from me to the empty manger. "Where's Eunie?" she pleaded, an obvious lump building up in her throat. We covered our ears at yet another scream, this time much closer than I had ever heard before. It couldn't have been any farther than the other side of the barn. Then we heard another sound, another cry, and, even in light of everything else, that was the worst sound I had ever heard, worse than the sound a pig makes the night before we find him dead outside the pen, worse than the wails that came from the woods and into our house when we are in the basement. It was Eunie calling for help. She was whimpering real soft. From the other side of the barn, I didn't need to think. If I had taken a moment to think, who knows what would have happened. I threw Sarah Beth in the barn and followed after her, making sure to shut that old wooden door as soft as I could manage. The barn was empty, in the growing dark, with concrete floors carpeted with rotten hay, for the pigs to sleep on when it got cold. The air was moist and claustrophobic, like a crypt. Holding my breath, we listened as Junie's little peeps made their way along the side of the barn, and I dared a look through to warp boards of the door. The pigs were frozen still, staring, hardly even breathing. I saw the arms first, carrying baby June in hands with great, gangly fingers laced like the brittle wicker of a basket. The whole bony mass screamed and moved on tiptoes at the ends of its stilted legs, and its chest swelled and shrunk unevenly. Eunie stopped crying when she looked over at Kicker. It stopped crying when it looked over at us. I couldn't pull away from its gaze. It was draped in moth-eaten rags, hopelessly patched together, and on its head and a nest of tangled strands of cobwebs that barely passed as hair lay a crown on chained daisies, just like Daddy used to draw. It reminded me of someone I used to know, someone who used to kiss my head at night and tell me they loved me, someone who didn't snarl with teeth nesting in bleeding gums, someone who looked like my sister, someone who never used to scare me. We stayed like that for a long time, neither of us moving a single muscle. I thought at any minute it would. Well, I didn't know what it would do to us, and I never figured out because after a while it just walked away with baby Eunie into the woods that was filling up with the evening mist. I choked back sobs as I fell to my knees. Sarah Beth wrapped her arms around me, skin still taut with goose flesh and all, but I felt safe like that. We both cried real good once we started to hear the pigs snorting again. Our voices bounced off the walls and the tin roof back into our ears, filling the room with the bereavement that Eunie deserved. She wasn't coming back. We knew we'd never see our baby sister again. We stayed in the barn for hours, to terrified wonder back into the night. When we ran out of tears, Sarah Beth laid her head down on my lap, looking at me like it was all a bad dream. Did it get Eunie? Yeah. She drew up her dress to wipe her nose. Bet that's what got Doogie, too. Maybe. Rose. Sarah Beth unveiled her dirty face from behind her dress. Was it Mama? I said no, even though Daddy said liars went to hell. Story 3, Sleepwalker. Knew I woke up screaming. It was the third time this week I woke screaming no, and my clothes were wet with sweat, even though the window was open, letting the cold night air in. What was wrong with me? Was I going insane? For the life of me, I could not remember what I was dreaming about. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes and looked at the clock. 5 a.m. It was 2 hours before I needed to get up to go to school. Did I dare close my eyes again? My body felt tired and weak, like I had just run a 5K race. Even as I debated whether to sleep or not, I caught myself nodding off. I shook my head and sat up straighter in bed. No, I am not going back to sleep. I climbed out of bed and headed to the bathroom. A shower would wake me up. I lived with my 23-year-old brother. He had been 18 when my parents died, so I was allowed to live with him. The first few years were rough, but I was 16 now and could easily take care of myself. Most of the time, like tonight, he slept at his girlfriend's house, so I had the place to myself, which was good since I kept waking up screaming. As predicted, my shower woke me up. I went to the kitchen and made myself some eggs and toast for breakfast, and started working on a report that was due Monday. I'm not like super student, but I tend to get my work done and get pretty good grades. In order to remain living with my brother, I have to maintain a certain GPA and not get in trouble too much. Since I didn't want to live in a foster home, I did what I needed to do. Plus, I really didn't want to spend the weekend working on this damn report. By 7:30 a.m. I started the 30-minute walk to school. My report was almost done. I just needed to type it out. As always, Zoe was waiting outside her house for me. We had been friends since elementary school, but after my parents died, we became really close. Her dad had died a few years before my parents did. That kind of shit brought people together. Hey Zoe, what's with the necklace? Zoe always wore really weird clothes. Today she had on a necklace with a 2-inch rubber chicken hanging off of it. It's a luck chicken. Chem test today. You really believe that shit? Don't you? She asked incredulously. I decided not to comment. The rest of the way to school we quizzed each other on our chem test. I was pretty out of it at school. Lack of sleep and nightmares were beginning to take its toll on me. By sixth period, I felt like I was sleepwalking my way to class. Mr. Jenkins, my history teacher, seemed to notice. You feeling all right, Mr. Silver? Yeah, I'm good. He raised an eyebrow at me in question. I think I'm getting that cold that's going around. The first rule of being an orphan living with your big brother is never offer too much information. I think I'm getting that cold that's going around always works, because there is always a cold going around. There are definitely some nasty bugs going around. He still didn't seem satisfied, though. Are you sleeping okay? I almost reacted. How could he know I wasn't sleeping well? That is, besides the bags under my eyes and constant yawning. Okay, so maybe I do look tired. It must just be sleep-deprived paranoia. Yeah, Mr. J, I'm sleeping fine. How's Chip? That brother of yours is something else. Happy for the topic change, I responded with gusto. Oh, you know Chip, he's still the same. He's a good kid. Then Mr. Jenkins grabbed my shoulder and guided me away from the other students. In a whisper he said, "Listen, you let me know if you start having trouble sleeping. Okay. It's really important that you tell me." He had this crazy expression on his face. I said sure and went to my seat. I couldn't get that look out of my mind. It stayed with me the whole walk home. You okay? Zoe asked. Yeah. Why? You barely talked all the way home. I hesitated for a second. Maybe I should tell Zoe about my nightmares and Mr. Jenkins. To be honest, it had kind of freaked me out. I'm fine just thinking about that report for English. Don't remind me. We said goodbye, and I made the rest of the trek home. At around 5:30 p.m., Chip came by to check in. He had 2 bags of groceries with him. Hey, kid, you don't look so good. You feeling okay? Think I'm just getting that cold that's going around. You sure? Maybe I should spend the night here tonight. No, I said it just a little too fast, but Chip didn't seem to notice. I helped him unload the groceries and assured him I was fine. Okay, if you need me, just give me a call. Will do. He started towards the door, then stopped and turned around. Hey, you're sleeping okay, right? He seemed really serious all of a sudden, and Chip was never serious. Yeah, of course. Why? Chip hesitated. He looked as though he were about to say something, then changed his mind. Nothing. Get some rest. Okay, kid, call me if you need anything. With that, Chip was out the door. Was it just me, or did it seem like he couldn't get out of the house fast enough? The rest of the night was pretty uneventful. I finished my homework and typed up my report. I wasn't that hungry, so I just had a yogurt for dinner. I was climbing into bed when I started feeling the anxiety kick in. Was I going to have a nightmare again? I picked up the phone to call Zoe, but changed my mind. It was already pretty late, and her mom didn't like her talking on the phone after 9 p.m. I thought about calling Chip, but what would I say? In the end, I turned off my light and hoped for the best. Knew I woke with a start. I was cold and drenched in sweat, and something sharp was poking my side. I reached around to feel what it was, and my hand touched hardwood. What the fuck? I sat up and hit my head hard on something. I could see stars as I felt hot blood run down my forehead and cheek. It was pitch black, and I started feeling my way around in the dark. Where the hell am I? I was under a table of some kind. I worked my way out from under it and continued to feel my way around. On top of the table, I felt a box of wood matches. I struck one, and an old cabin of some sort came into view. The table I had been under was very rough made of heavy wood. I started to look around, and the match burned down to my hand. Ouch! I reached down and grabbed another match. I noticed an old-style oil lamp and some candles on the table. I lit the candles and tried to figure out how the lamp worked. In the end, I just had to light the wick like a candle. The room, now illuminated, looked even more dingy and old. I felt like I had gone back in time. Like this cabin belonged in the Old West. My hand was covered in blood. I must have wiped the blood off my face while I was looking around. I was still wearing my sweats and t-shirt I had worn to bed, and my feet were bare. My clothes were sticking to me from sweat. Continuing my search of the cabin, I found it to be a single room with no bathroom. There was just an old wardrobe in one corner, and the table I had woke under. I noticed that my side still stung, and when I felt under my shirt, it was all sticky. I walked over to the lamp, pulled up my shirt, which was also sticky, and realized it was sticky with blood. There was a deep gash in my side that, now identified, seemed to hurt 4 times as much. I walked back to the table, picked up the lamp, and headed for the door. It had a very simple locking mechanism, just a board you latched and a stay. When I opened the door, it was a dark night. I could hear crickets and frogs so loud that I couldn't believe I hadn't noticed them before. I also noticed that I felt a little dizzy. I kept feeling like I was going to fall over. I took a step off the porch and stepped in wet, slimy mud. My foot began to sink in. I quickly pulled it out. The smell of decay reached my nose, and my foot was covered in black mud. I went back into the cabin, deciding it was better to wait till daylight. I reached for my phone to check the time, but it wasn't in my pocket. It must still be by my bed at home. How did I get here? I continued to search the cabin. The wardrobe was empty. There were a few rusted cans on the table, and a huge knife that was also rusted and covered in blood. Is this what cut me? I could begin to see a faint glow under the door. It must be getting light. I went back to the door and opened it up. The cabin was on the back of a small lake. The water was only about 25 yards away from the cabin. It was still pretty dark out, but I could hear cars driving by across the lake. The highway. This must be that little lake you can see from the road. but I have never noticed a cabin here before. How did I get here? I was about a mile out of town. If I cut across on this side of the lake, I could come to town unnoticed. I started making my way home in the early dawn light. The sun was just coming up when I reached the house and went inside. I went to the bathroom to clean up and almost screamed when I saw my reflection. I was almost white and covered in blood. My hair was matted to my head, where I had cut my head open, and my shirt was soaked in blood. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a trash bag and put all my clothes in the bag and took a shower. Afterwards, I took the trash bag down the street to the dumpster outside of the liquor store. My feet were sore from walking barefoot, and I had a headache from hitting my head. The gash in my side was still bleeding, so I bandaged it up. The cut in my head wasn't too bad, and my hair covered it. My phone had 3 text messages, one from Zoe asking me to call her when I woke up, one from Chip checking in, and one from a number I didn't recognize with the message 01011. 01001, 0110, 0110, 0101, 1010. What the hell does that mean? I texted Chip to let him know I was fine. The last thing I wanted was him coming by. Zoe wanted me to come over and work on the report with her. I told her I finished my report yesterday and wasn't feeling very good. I booted my computer and started researching sleepwalking. A lot of it fit, except it was only supposed to last up to 30 minutes. The cabin was just over a mile away. No way I could have got there in 30 minutes unless I ran. That would explain the sweat and the exhaustion. Could I be a sleepwalker? The article had said some sleepwalkers were treated with drugs that meant going to a doctor. They also said you could just lock the house up so the sleepwalker couldn't get out. I was going to try that tonight. I spent the majority of the day making sure I could lock all the windows and the doors. The front door wasn't a problem. We had a deadbolt that you had to lock with a key from both sides, but the back door was more problematic. There was only a slide lock from the inside. How sophisticated was I while I slept? Could I figure that out? I was just about to go buy another deadbolt when I realized the slide bolt could be locked with a padlock. I locked it up with my bike lock. Hopefully Chip didn't notice if he came by this evening. The windows were all typical window locks, but all the screens were strong and in place. I must have gone out the back door last night. We normally didn't lock the back door at all in case one of us lost our keys. As dusk approached, I began to feel my anxiety rise. I was confident I wouldn't get out of the house, but I still didn't like the idea that I was walking around in my sleep. I would have to tell Chip at some point, but I wasn't ready for that yet. Chip called me in the evening to check in. He wasn't going to come by. I told him I was feeling better and was planning on hanging out with Zoe tomorrow. I climbed into bed for the night, anxious but confident that I would wake up at home. I left the bathroom light on and my door open, so there would be a little light in my room. I woke up screaming again. It was pitch black again, and I recognized the stale smell of the cabin immediately, as well as the metallic tang of blood. I quickly assessed myself. I couldn't feel any new injuries. I felt my way to the table and lit the lamp. I was covered in blood, my hands, my arms, and my shirt. Even my pants and feet were splattered with blood. There was no way this much blood had come from me. I remembered from my research that in rare cases, people had committed homicide while sleepwalking? Did I kill someone last night? I had to get home before light. I was covered in blood, and I had no idea whose. I didn't wait for first light this time, and started the trek home. When I got home, I found the back door locked tight. The front door was unlocked, and my keys were in the lock inside the door. My phone had one text message, 0110110110110101010. More random numbers, but different than the first time. I again threw my clothes away and took a shower. At 9 in the morning, I called Zoe. I asked her how her report was coming along, and after a safe amount of time asked her about the numbers separated by commas. Sounds like binary to me. What's binary? You know, computer language, ones and zeros. Computer language. Yeah, the computer makes everything into ones and zeros. Actually is pluses and minuses, but it uses them as ones and zeros. What were the numbers again? Oh, I don't have them anymore, but that sounds right. I didn't like lying to Zoe, but I needed to figure out what these numbers meant on my own. Once again I did research, this time on binary. The numbers were 1,191,212,518 and 1,321,184,518. I found a site that had used binary to code messages, so I used a simple alphanumeric conversion, and it spelled killer and murderer. This was not good. Someone was calling me a killer and a murderer, and it was beginning to look like they were right. Was this what insanity was like? Was I going crazy? Would I know if I were? It was already almost 5. It would be dark soon. I had to stop myself from getting out of the house again. Chip had come by at 3 and said I looked terrible. He was going to spend the night here. I needed to stop myself from falling asleep tonight at all cost, just in case I set up a video camera in my room and left the lights on. I wanted to see what I was doing. I didn't want Chip to know I was recording myself, though, so I hid the camera. At around 7, Chip got a call from his girlfriend and said she needed his help, but he would come back later. I told him I would be fine. I was tired and was going to bed early anyway. Are you sure? Yeah, dude, I'm fine. Okay, well, call me if you need anything. And he was gone. I fought sleep all evening. I dozed off a few times, but I was sitting up, so when I fell forward, I woke up. I leaned my head against my window, trying to see outside, and knew I woke up in the cabin again. I was covered in blood, and my hands had scratch marks on them. It was already daylight. I had to get home unnoticed, but I was covered from head to foot in blood, and I had no shoes on. I walked towards the door of the cabin when I heard voices outside. Come out with your hands over your head. The police were here. Did you hear me? Come out with your hands over your head. We know you are in there. I'm coming out, I yelled back. I opened the door and 10 cops were standing outside the cabin, guns drawn. One of them began yelling instruction. Lace your hands behind your neck. Now get down on your knees. Lie down, face down. I felt several people grabbing me from behind, and somebody stuck his knee into my back. The wind got knocked out of me. I heard more yelling, and made out Chip's voice yelling for me. That's my brother. I was taken to the police station. Chip was there, but I was in an interrogation room. The police questioned me for what felt like days. It was actually 5 hours. I told them that I had no idea how I had gotten to the cabin. I explained that it was the third time I had ended up there. They asked why I hadn't turned myself in. I couldn't answer that part. They let Chip see me finally. He looked really scared. He asked me if I had hurt anyone, and I told him I didn't think so. He told me not to tell anyone anything else until he got me a lawyer. I was put in a special cell since I was underage. The blood on my clothes was determined to not be mine. With my information, they found my other two changes of clothes, and those turned out to be to other people's blood and my own. The second day I was in jail, Mr. Jenkins was allowed to visit me. He asked me how I was. I told him I was as good as I could be under the circumstances. He seemed really annoyed for some reason, but not at me. Mr. Silver, do you know how your parents died? Of course I do. They were murdered, yes, but do you know any of the details? No, nobody does. Their killer was never found. That's not the case. Your brother decided not to tell you the truth, and since you were a minor under his care, I was not allowed to tell you the truth. What? Chip knows who killed my parents? Yes, as do a few of us. Why didn't anybody tell me? Your brother thought it best if you didn't know. I never agreed. Who killed my parents? The truth is your dad killed your mom, and Chip killed your dad. I couldn't believe what I had heard. I was about to say something when your dad was a sleepwalker. He had been for years. He had been to the doctor for it for many years. They tried drugs, sleep therapy, nothing worked. Typically, it was no big deal. Your mother would just follow him around, but he began to get violent in his sleep. More than once your mom had to wake Chip to help her with him. One evening, Chip heard your mom screaming. He ran into the kitchen to find your dad stabbing your mother. Chip had no choice but to shoot your dad to try and save your mom. It was too late, though. Your mom was already dead, and so was your dad. My dad was a sleepwalker, yes, and that's why I wanted you to know. I felt if you knew, you could get help before anything bad happened. But Chip was afraid it would be too much for you to know what had happened, and that it would scar you too much to know the truth. And now I'm just like my dad. I said it more to myself than to him. You have no control over what you do when you sleep. How could you know what you were doing? Suddenly I remembered the camera. Mr. Jenkins, you have to go to my house. I recorded myself. What? I realized a few days ago that I was sleepwalking, so I set up a camera so I would know what I was doing. It was just in my room. I was going to set it up in different places every night. It would have recorded everything I did before I left. I'll get Chip to let me in your house. Mr. Jenkins stood up to go. Wait. What? Don't tell Chip the back door is open. Go in through the back door. The camera is on my bookshelf. The news said it was the biggest story around, perhaps the biggest of the decade. The sleepwalker killer case, they were calling it. 10 unsolved cases over the last 6 years were all being looked at again. They were confident they would all be solved now, and the parents of the victims allowed some closure. I can't believe it, Zoe said, reading the headlines. Zoe, Mrs. Roberts admonished her daughter. It's okay, Mrs. Roberts. I have had enough secrets to last me a lifetime. Chip was behind bars, and Zoe's parents had agreed to let me live with them instead of some random foster family. I was waiting for my mandatory counseling at school. when Mr. Jenkins came out of the principal's office and called me to him. We went back into the principal's office and sat down. Mr. Raymond, the principal, was at his desk. "How are you doing, Mr. Silver?" Mr. Jenkins asked. "All things considered, not bad," I managed a smile. But I felt sick, like I always did when I had to talk about Chip. "How did you know?" I had been waiting for Mr. Jenkins to ask me this. There was a good chance he would have to go to court if Chip didn't plead guilty. Chip was planning on pleading insanity. He said he heard God telling him to kill the evil girls. When my dad and mom found some blood-soaked clothes, he didn't wait for God to tell him they were evil. Every time I woke in the cabin, I remember there being a familiar smell, but it was so buried behind the smell of decay, blood, and sweat. It wasn't until I remembered the camera that I also recognized the smell. It was the smell of Chip's cologne. The camera was sitting on the bookshelf right next to the bottle he had bought me for Christmas. "Now you can smell like me, little man," he had said. "I still can't believe it was Chip," Mr. Raymond said, half to himself and half to us. When I watched that video, watched him inject Mr. Silver with something, scratch his hands and arms up, Mr. Jenkins stopped and swallowed hard, then pour that blood on his own brother. Mr. Jenkins looked at me like he was sorry I was Chip's brother. "And the text messages to you. They found his pay-as-you-go phone. Have you seen him?" Mr. Raymond asked me. "Not yet. The headlines today had read, 'Fallen hero convicted of 12 counts of first-degree murder in the Sleepwalker case.'